Fortnights ago, the Ugandan army launched artillery and air force raids inside the DRC. Barely after its infantry tank brigade and other fighting units snaked through the forested paths and briefly camped at Mukakati in Beni on the edge of Ituri Forest, North Kivu province, as their vehicles got mired down in treacherous roads towards ADF bases. NTV has learned that the deal to allow the UPDF into the DRC was built on a carefully crafted relationship with Felix Tshisekedi on the eve of Congo's presidential elections in 2018. It eventually resulted into the two chiefs of defense forces, General Celestin Mbala and General Wilson Mbadi, inking a deal that would allow the troops to hand down the ADF that recently paid allegiance to the Islamic State as a regional affiliate. However, the agreement between the two states remains a tightly guarded document, with the specter of violence hanging over one of the most volatile pockets in the world. Many questions remain unanswered.
The official narrative given to us as a country by the government, and that narrative says that we are in the DRC in pursuit of the ADF that was responsible for the attacks here in Uganda, especially in October and November. If one goes by that narrative, then there is our presence in the DRC is legitimate. And that is because, that is assuming that the intelligence given to us as the public is actually reliable. Because as you know, intelligence can be manipulated, can be invented.
When a country invites another, that's how we began our conversation. It's a gold standard of how to deal with these issues. In the past, there was accusations of aggression, of invasion. That's not there. Now we see it, as you know, the DRC is joining the East African community. That's another dimension. And this really fits in well in addressing common threats in the region, by member states of East African community, by neighbors of ICGLR. We are also members of ICGLR with different protocols that really calls on us to work together.
For how long will the UPDF remain in North Kivu, one of the most restive parts of eastern Congo? Will the ghosts of the intractable conflict that sucked in more than 8 African nations from 1998 to 2003 return to haunt the UPDF? What is the army's exit strategy? The eastern part of the Congo, where the Ugandan army is located, is nearly a failed state and divided into territorial chiefdoms run by tribal warlords, insurgent groups, professional cutthroats, and an international syndicate that pays fees to roaming militias to protect their mining rights. Several reports also indicate that the UN peacekeeping mission in Congo, a lame duck outfit, and the Congolese National Army are usually complicit in the plunder and human rights abuses of nationals.
The two governments have held discussions on how to deal with this. We know it's a crowded theater, but we are dealing also with our friends in MONUSCO. That's another force on the ground, to make sure that we cooperate. There are no unfortunate incidents, and the other groups that are really operating on the ground are Congolese groups. The Mai Mais, the Ituri armed groups, those ones can be dealt with by DRC. We are focused on ADF. It's mission specific.
So is the Ugandan army, which is not entirely squeaky clean, going by the past record when its army was deployed in the DRC between 1998 and 2003. The International Court of Justice, according to highly placed sources, plans to deliver a ruling in the armed activities on the territory of Congo case, where the Kinshasa government sued Uganda after the completion of a recent hearing. The DRC is seeking $4.3 billion, a sum that is larger than the combined budgets of Uganda's infrastructure, health, education and defense sectors.
It is prejudicial to talk about a verdict that has not come out. But with this kind of environment we are working together, there is nothing we cannot talk about with our colleagues in DRC. And that would be one of the things that we would address. We have tried to negotiate the judgment in the past, and we will continue. That was a very unfortunate past. It should really be behind us and look at the future of dealing with the common threats. The intervention then was also compared by threats. ADF had invaded Kasese. You remember the Chitwamba incident, the Busereka incidents and all that. We had a case of self-defense at that time, but the relationship with DRC was not maybe to the level where it is now, that we can work together.
So in this context, even before we went into the DRC, one of the strategies the present president of the DRC, Felix, attempted to do when he came to power was to build some alliances and understanding with all the neighbors, to the extent that the president began to talk directly with Uganda, with Burundi, with Rwanda, to try and find out a way to allow the three countries that claim that rebels that from time to time attack them come from the eastern DRC, to allow them to go into DRC. The president was beginning to discuss that with them to the extent that he was even willing to allow all the three countries to send in their troops alongside the soldiers from the DRC. So when the attack took place, it took place at a time when the conversation was really taking place. The biggest fear at the time was not Uganda going to DRC, Rwanda going to DRC, Burundi going to DRC, was really the possibility of having a proxy war in the DRC.
The Hague-based court in 2005 ruled that Uganda had violated international law by occupying parts of Ituri with its own troops and supporting other armed groups in the area during the conflict. It also ruled that the DRC had violated international law with an attack on the Ugandan embassy in Kinshasa as a result of the counter memorial that Uganda filed at the Hague-based court. The UN court ordered the DRC and Uganda to negotiate mutual reparations, but in 2015, the DRC returned to the UN court saying the talks were not progressing. Tshisekedi will also be keen not to alienate the Congolese elite who have put up flag against the UPDF deployment. The UPDF's deployment has also placed other regional players on alert. Rwanda, which has been having a long-standing dispute with Uganda and Burundi, has a keen interest in North and South Kivu, where it claims that the two countries want to shore up rebel fighters to overthrow the Kigali government. In turn, Kampala and Bujumbura claim Rwanda is supporting rebels fighting these governments. Initially, Tshisekedi had planned to invite Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi into the DRC. It's not clear yet why he shelved this plan.
ADF is multinational. ADF has members from Rwanda, from Burundi, from Mozambique, from Tanzania, from Uganda, among others. Okay? ADF during its operation, more so following the 2020-2021 military attack by the RDC troops, has now strategically allied itself with some members, senior members of the military of the DRC. It has allied itself with some of the chiefs that control communities in the DRC. It has allied itself with some of the militias in the eastern part of the DRC. And you have roughly close to about 120 different militias. Okay, some get defeated today, others emerge the next day. Now then, the complication is, one, since the ADF has allied itself with a number of militias in the DRC, in the eastern DRC, attack on the ADF means attack on a number of the militias in the eastern DRC. And some of the militias are being funded and supported by some of the neighboring countries. Okay? That's why you have accusation, counter-accusation. Burundi and Uganda saying Rwanda is the one supporting militias, rebel groups that are based in the DRC that have plans to attack them. Rwanda says the same thing. Uganda and Burundi are funding and supporting them, some of the militias there. And some of the militias are fairly autonomous, okay, because they're fighting either to try and control the state or to try and control the minerals in the territory. So there is a possibility that even if you went after the ADF, and it becomes difficult to define what the ADF looks like.
Highly placed sources claim Kigali has placed its fighters on standby after the Ugandan army sent its fighters into North Kivu. Could this conflict, which for a while has been fought through proxy allies, morph into a full-blown regional conflict?
This operation has limited objective to really deal with ADF, not to deal with the entire armed groups and politics of DRC. So again, the presidents will be sitting and reviewing it, but it's not a long-term presence in DRC.
There are also fears of a regional arms race emerging in the Great Lakes region as these countries ramp up their firepower both on the ground and in the skies. Uganda's advanced Russian fleet of Sukhoi aircraft fighter jets has given it aerial superiority. Rwanda, in turn, has purchased the advanced Sky Dragon air defense missiles from China to counter any threat in the skies. Whereas it's quite plausible that the purchases were meant to protect the borders and sovereignty of these countries from hostility, they have depleted the national coffers of these two countries.
Well, the possibility exists, and that's the nature of conflict, whereby you're trying to create some uneasy stability in the system through deterrence. Okay, you get a point whereby you are equally armed and you're capable of destroying each other to the extent that you think it is better not to wage war between you and your enemy. So there's potential for arms race that is going to be perhaps elevated by this particular moment of our presence in the DRC. However, that should not be exaggerated, because, for example, the three countries that are in conflict at the moment, Burundi and Rwanda. Rwanda already has good intelligence on what Burundi has. Okay, so even without Uganda's involvement in the conflict, okay, Rwanda is already arming itself enough to invade, to deter what is coming from Burundi, and vice versa. Rwanda already has good intelligence on what Uganda has. That even without the war itself, now what we are fighting in the DRC, it is able to arm itself enough to deter potential violent conflict between Uganda and Rwanda.
Some government critics argue that the deployment of the UPDF is meant to deflect domestic challenges and thrust Uganda into the crosshairs of a global jihad fight. In their view, this could turn into a boon for President Museveni, whose halo has been sleeping in the eyes of his erstwhile allies in the West.
That is a cynical way of looking at it, really trying to tie it to our domestic. Of course, we have domestic politics and disagreements. That's a fact of any country. But this is really separate. And I think, all political opinions have not come across one that says they support terrorism and they support ADF. The question maybe is on differences of approach of dealing with it. And I think you saw what happened on the streets of Kampala, indiscriminate bombings. There is no government in the world there is no government worth its name that will fold its hand and say, oh, this will sort itself out. I think we had a legitimate case of self-defense in dealing with the ADF. Let's isolate it from the politics. Let's deal with, ADF is not part of the Ugandan politics. They are on the fringe. They are out there. They have become part of the global jihadist movement, and we are dealing with it as an international community. Uganda is part of the international community.
So that the West began to move around right away, America, France, Britain, to figure out how ISIS was now expanding into Africa. And then I think around March of 2020, about 2021, the US government decided to unilaterally declare ADF as part of the franchise of ISIS, together with a group based in Mozambique, as now part of the larger program of ISIS in the Central Africa province. ISIS as well did the same, advertised ADF, okay, as part of its operation in the Central African province. And Uganda, now aware of the geopolitical nature of things around, decided also to take advantage of that, okay? That now let us remind the West that we are being attacked by the same terror group that is actually a threat to their interests in Africa and also in the Western world, okay? And that is ADF, okay? So ADF is taking advantage, okay, by claiming that it has association, but also a number of Western intelligence suggests that there is no very close connection between ADF and the ISIS itself, okay? Very loose connection. But the Uganda government is using that as an opportunity to mobilize support from the West and to indirectly persuade the West to turn and look the other way on the question of human rights and democratic experiment in the country, to focus on the most immediate and perhaps more fatal threat to the Western interest, that is ISIS.
But the exponents of the deployment argue that Uganda must defend its territory in a troubled region. Mackay University political science don, the late Professor Dan Mudola, argued that Uganda ought to have a large defense vote because of its geopolitical location. Mudola proffered that the country needs to build a cordon of sanitaire around Uganda's borders and at the same time contain internal fluid situations. Uganda also plans to build a number of roads in the eastern part of the DRC. In November, the Council of Ministers endorsed the DRC to join the East African Community as the 7th member state. This could bring on board a market of 90 million people and open another gateway for the region through the Atlantic. By June 2021, figures revealed that DRC was the leading importer of Uganda's goods in the East African bloc. However, for Uganda to sustain economic prosperity in the Great Lakes region, experts opine that its army in the DRC must not be viewed as an occupational force, avoid costly mistakes, and win over trust of the local Congolese community, and have a quick exit from the neighboring state.